You are looking at a remarkable idea. An idea that has intrigued and attracted and literally thrilled thousands upon thousands of men, women, and children. And you, my friends, are about to witness this idea become a reality.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Morning.
How are y'all today?
Good. I'm good.
Are you having fun?
No.
I
As
am.
much fun as you can with a mask on in a hot room.
People pay a lot of money for that, Jim.
Yeah.
Just wearing a mask in a hot room.
So, I guess we can begin. My name is James Sato. I'm a film producer and screenwriter. To my left is Terry Sherwood.
Yes, I am. Oh,
Go ahead.
I am a published author. I write for We Belong Dead magazine in the UK. I review independent horror film for a UK site called HorrorScreamsVideo.com.
Don't you also write for Spooky Island?
Yes, I write for Spooky Isles too. It's funny. I'm a Canadian-born guy, lives in Calgary, and I get more support from the UK than I do in Canada. That's a topic for discussion. Anyway, moving on.
Hi, I'm Melanie. I am a indie horror author. You can find me on Amazon. And we're just kind of here to discuss horror and anything you want to talk about. It's very interactive, so shoot some questions at us if you have them. I like to think we know a bit about it anyway.
You should also mention Melanie McCurdy.
Oh, yes.
On Amazon.
Not just her books, not her. She doesn't.
Yeah, no, I'm not for
Do you want to mention
sale.
your book?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to plug everything.
So this is kind of, we do this every Calgary Con, and we only get half the time we normally do. So it's about the state of horror in 2021. So any questions you might have, whether they be about filmmaking, writing, feel free to come up and ask. And let's just talk horror.
I could start it off briefly by throwing a general question. It's kind of a cliche to ask this. Everybody knows, of course, about the health problems and everything that we're all having. Have you noticed in horror, book, film, anything, stories of that nature? Or do you project anything that's going to be coming in the future that you probably would be interested in? Is the pandemic affecting the horror media?
You mean in terms of thematically and stories?
Yeah, thematically, comics, books, or anything for that matter. Personally, I've noticed. I guess you could say it's an ignorance of the theme. We just seem to be carrying on. I don't know if you don't see horror people wearing a mask during a plague, for instance. So I'm just wondering when this will all filter down, because it has to all filter down. In times of strife, you will get good art. We have some questions. Wow.
Oh, I was just gonna add additionally, you said oh, it just seems underwhelming having the mask. I'm like, if anything, it could be just a slow burn horror, where it's just oh, it seems like everything's okay when things could escalate
Yeah.
to something further.
Absolutely.
I've seen a couple of independent films that deal with the subject of isolation. And one was a kind of a horror romance where this guy kept jumping down balconies to go talk to this girl, and there was, menacing people all the time, trying to kick the door down and that kind of thing. And that was for a short film competition. But I really haven't seen anything all that. You would think that there would be more, but
Probably just too soon.
Yeah, well,
Does it take time? Does it take time to filter down, or?
well, it's,
We got lots of questions. This is cool. Feel free to step up to the mic if you're. Should we move that mic farther down for some? I guess we can't because it's cord. Those of us that
no,
are
it's
a
taped
bit
to the
deaf,
floor.
those of us a bit deaf from rock and roll.
I can project, so don't worry. Or has it been predictive, right? Like we've seen a huge trend in zombie horror and fiction in the last, that unseen enemy, you know, the thing that creates that anxiety. Does the pandemic actually come after and capitalize on some of these anxieties and trends we already are seeing? Because we all know that horror has typically reflected the anxiety of an age sort of thing, right? So is this just a wonderful coincidence?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's a good question. Because if you think about the zombie films, it's usually people isolated against the undead. And worrying about, like, if we step outside this building, we're screwed.
That is, the enemy is us, right?
Yeah.
We are the vector, we're the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so far from reality?
Not these days.
So,
Yeah, because you know, like even the idea of the undead is kind of like similar, parallel to even like, I guess you could say someone who is infected with like the virus that we are currently dealing with.
Personally, for literature writing, I find that people want an escape from the reality, so we're just not seeing a lot of pandemic stories because everyone's living the horror, right? I think it's just for that particular medium, I think it's going to be a trickle-down effect. It may be a couple years and then we'll have an explosion of these kinds of stories and films, etc.
Quite probably.
Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed a lot of isolation stories and fear of the unknown kind of before the pandemic hit. Like one of my favorite horror podcasts is called Station Blue.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically about a guy who's up at like this like research station in Antarctica completely by himself for like 2 months. I think it's basically a story of him slowly losing his mind. And I think it's kind of cool that like even before all this stuff happened and the world kind of exploded, that like we had stories like that anyway, and kind of the fear of the unknown. Like another one of my favorites is the Magnus Archives, and it's that kind of eerie like stuff is going on, but we don't really know what it is. It's just kind of these like
That unseen menace sort of.
yeah, just something, and like you don't really know if these people are crazy and they're just like imagining this kind of stuff, or if it's like actual events happening.
What was the name of that again?
The Magnus Archives.
I'm going to write that down.
on the tablecloth, and take it with you.
I'm going to do what rock stars do. There.
Do you find that the psychological thrillers of the unseen is making more of a comeback now, or is it still like your villain of the week where you have something that you're fighting against particularly? What are you seeing more in horror at the moment?
I think it's on the uprise.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I mean, yeah, the slashers and everything else are still out there. But a lot of the indie filmmakers have gone more towards the dark psychological aspect of film.
I'm not unhappy about that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not getting any of the big slashers, you know, there's very, very few that are really good. So.
That brings up a point. I think this person here mentioned the term that I've heard a lot of was slow burn horror. And I have seen, in my capacity to review the pictures, I have seen a lot of slow burn horror. Usually, if it's 90 minutes, it's about 45 minutes to build on something, and then we do a little twist here and there and a twist here and there. Is that working for people? Is that working for, like, in fiction, I know it is when you get the 900-page book and the payoff is somewhere in there.
I think it depends on the person, because I think of, like, let's say The Witch by Robert Eggers. And for me, I love like the tension buildup that they did in the narrative, because the director put so much conscious effort and research to that time period and what they believed, which kind of made it feel more real. Meanwhile, like I talked to my sister and she's like, "Oh, I thought it was boring," you know. So there's that.
that brings up a thing that I've had a little bit of an argument with one of my editors on. When you spoke of the slow build-up and the slow burn, does it not become a suspense film, a thriller film, and not a horror film? I've said that a lot of the slasher films are more like crime movies, not horror films. And they go, no, this is what it is. And I go, no, because look at the elements of a crime story. You have say an outrageous killing, blah, 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 resolution, maybe tweak for a sequel.
I think
Is that what we're getting?
What sets those slow burn horror films aside is like the buildup of dread specifically. I think that kind of differentiates it from the suspense films. So, I don't know. I really like when you're watching a film and there's all that dread, and then eventually the horror comes. You just don't know when or where or how.
How many here, sorry to monopolize this a little bit, how many here subscribe to streaming channels to watch? Are you Shudder people and Arrow and good.
Yeah, well, Netflix, Shudder particularly with their originals.
I find Tubi as well has some fairly interesting horror films, some bad ones. Probably a lot of bad ones. But there are some surprises on there. And in fact, you can find Jim's film Blood Mania on there as well by Herschel Gordon Lewis and Jim. It was all filmed here in Calgary, so I advise you to check that out. I enjoy it. And there's another great one by a friend of ours, Jess, The Good Things Devils Do. It's on Tubi as well. And I think you'll find some very interesting takes on horror that we don't see necessarily with Netflix originals and that sort of thing. It's more, for me, it's more the slash and dash, and that's kind of what I enjoy. I've missed that in everyday horror.
I'm gonna Jess Norvasgard will be watching this, so.
Hi, Jess.
Hi, Jess. The Good Things Devils Do, he directed and wrote. And it has Kane Hodder, Linnea Quigley, Bill Oberst Jr. Kane Hodder actually won an award for his role. And it is on streaming services and Tubi?
Tubi,
And
yeah.
Tubi as well.
It's very well done, honestly. And I'm picky about my horror. I've watched it twice in 2 days.
How long is it? What's the running time of it?
90 minutes, 92
minutes.
minutes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you guys are talking a little bit about your personal preferences, and then also this discussion about how like horror reflects obviously generations and stuff. How much do you think about your audience and what they specifically want at that time versus the story you want to tell?
Well, the times have always been such an influence on horror films. I mean, if you look back at the 50s with the nuclear age, giant insects being mutated by radiation, that sort of thing. So each decade kind of reflects, and I think that's why, like Terry says, or like Mel says, maybe in a year or two you'll see a lot more of isolation, sort of COVID horror.
I think everyone's still adjusting too. I mean, I know it's been 2 years, but human nature is it just takes time to sort of process that sort of thing. And I think that's why we're just not seeing a lot of those stories yet. It'll be very interesting to see though in the next 2 years, 3 years, what we get out of it.
So has isolation been bothering you? Or, yeah?
As we all sit in a crowded room.
See, for me, I took this period of isolation to be creative. And to that end, I really shouldn't announce this, but
You're gonna anyway.
yeah, I mean, one of the major streaming services that wants to be the horror network, and that's the only clue I'll give you, the big horror network, has asked me to write a script, a very dark script. And the second draft is being worked on right now, and if the film gods smile upon me, we'll be shooting in Calgary in the spring. And it's something I was talking to one of the guests, Rachel Scarsden, about, so. Go ahead.
Is there any topic you guys think is too dark for a horror movie?
That's a good question,
In
because
my opinion, no.
Actually, for me, yeah, it is. I will not watch a cannibal movie. I will not watch anything that harms animals. Any movie or book or comic that harms animals, I will just throw away in the garbage. I think as a filmmaker, it is cheap. It is cheap writing to do that. And you need to actually go back to writing school. We're not doing repulsion here. We're doing maybe some dread. But anything that harms animals or a cannibal picture, no, I will not watch.
see, when we spoke about horror reflecting the fears of the society at the time, well, what do people fear now? They fear
Disease.
sexual criminals
Jason
who
Cannon.
go after kids, pedophiles. Jason Cannon, yeah.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't be political in this, but it's
Well, everybody seems to like it.
Fox
But,
News late night.
but yeah, I mean, people fear pedophiles. They fear child abduction rings, all that sort of thing. So, but if you were to try to make a movie about pedophilia,
I think it's been done a few times.
well, yeah,
A
well,
lot.
That brings me,
but I
about
mean,
to these
these
stories
days,
being
a
tried.
mainstream.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. To answer a question that was here, we talked about our personal preferences. More, not that what I see is the epitome of independent film. But what I do see is a lot of attempts at slow burn horror, but meager attempts at knowing how to write it. It takes a lot to do that, a lot of filmmaking skill, and I will say it, not to bash the filmmakers, but the actors. The actors, either they don't have the pacing for it, they don't have the ability to do it. It's just an intangible. And one of the things that, when I was reading, somebody was saying about one of the key points of independent film is if you do an independent film, spend money on a lead actor or female actor. Make sure that's the key. That's what you're running the story on. Make it good. The other people, you can still build around. But this is mostly what I'm seeing.
Well, there's a lot of indie filmmakers that make movies for $3,000, $500. So that kind of rules that out. But
Yeah.
there's a glut of them.
Yeah, but you get maybe find somebody who wants to get involved in something. I'll waive my fee, and boom, here I am.
And if you're thinking about becoming an independent filmmaker, the biggest thing is pay your people. Pay them adequately, and because they spend a lot of time, and hire people that are good at what they do, whose job it is, like a cinematographer, an audio engineer. They spend a lot of money at school to do it. Now, I mean, if it's a lark and you want to go shoot a zombie movie in your backyard or whatever, fine, but you're not going to find distribution. You might upload it to YouTube and say how many views you get.
You should speak about that, about distribution. Are there any filmmakers out here, or are we fans and don't mean to put the finger on you? Yeah, it's like everything for film though. You get the movie made, that's a hard thing. Now getting it seen is the battle,
That's
especially in
the battle.
Canada.
I had a question about that in regards to getting, the horror genre out there and seen. What are your opinions on like new media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and that in relation to kind of spreading the horror genre or even using that as your main platform?
I think it's definitely helping to get the word out there. For me personally, being an indie author, we go by word of mouth a lot, so these social media outlets are very handy. I don't know if you guys find the same thing. Might be a little different with filmmaking.
Yeah, for me, it's actually Kickstarter. Some of those funding places, the crowdfunding places, you can go and you can find a project. Somebody's put an appeal out for something.
Patreon too.
Yeah, and you can. I've supported at least 5, and you get some really, really good perks like autographed posters, Blu-ray for one called Appetite for Sin. Hopefully it'll be coming out, and it's like $40. for a Blu-ray, and with signing the cast and everything. It seemed like a pretty good story.
Well, and people share that on social media, so
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
horror, horror, horror. In terms of distribution for film, when you find a distributor, and there's lots of them out there, it used to be that, let's say, Amazon Prime would pay you 12 cents for every hour that somebody watched your movie. So every time somebody watches your movie twice, you make 24 cents. Now, unless you're Adam Sandler, who's had like 500 million minutes, you're not making a lot of money, and that 12 cents is now half of that. Surprisingly, Tubi pays better than a lot of streaming services because of the advertising. And because we're horror fans, the best thing that you could possibly do is hard medium. And we all know we'd like to bring our Blu-ray for somebody to sign, or, you know. And horror fans are the ones who want to see the behind-the-scenes documentaries and, you know, that kind of thing that you don't get with streaming. So horror is unique in that way. I've kind of given up on trying to raise money. I'm going to the networks now. I'm going to the studios, the streamers, because the money's up front. You're paid. You know, maybe, you know, a sum. Let's say you get a budget of $5 million from a streaming service. 30% of that goes to producers. So there's my money. If I'm smart, I negotiate for hard media rights so I can release the Blu-ray. And that way, it's kind of a win-win. But yeah, I mean, one of the most closely guarded secrets is how to get to acquisition and development at Netflix, Amazon, Shudder, any of them. And you have to be extremely lucky and know somebody if you want to actually be able to contact them. And again, the God smiled upon me, so.
I mean, it does happen that someone will pick up your film, your book, something like that on media. It has happened for me. I don't know if it's happened for Terry as well.
Yeah.
And we are very, very lucky when that happens. It's a lot of work, no matter what genre that you're using, filmmaking, writing, art, anything. With the horror genre, because a lot of people I find still have those blinders on. I live with people like that. For me, I find being a woman in the industry writing sometimes extreme horror, it is a very difficult market to break into because it's still an old boys club. Women don't write like that, but I do. You know, my greatest joy was when I kept my publisher up for 3 days after reading something I wrote. That was the greatest joy that I've had in years because it meant that I was actually doing something right. All I keep telling people now that do come to me that are writing horror is I tell them just to write it. Because what's scary for us can either be the same for somebody else, or it might ignite that fear and keep them up at night, and then they're going to remember your name. They're going to be looking for that because they know that they can get that joy out of it.
Joy.
I don't know what else to call it because that's what it is for me.
I was just gonna say, just because like you guys do like writing and then there's like filmmaking, I guess like based off those mediums, how is like horror expressed differently to you? Like what kind of how does it leave you unsettled comparatively from like, you know, from writing and filmmaking?
Well, it's very visual with the filmmaking. I mean, writing is visual, but in here. So whatever words are on the page, everyone's going to sort of process it differently, I suppose. I find for visual, for film, it's a little easier to get the point across sometimes because it's right there in your face, you know. With writing, you're like he said, 900 pages later and you're still building it. It's a little bit different.
Yeah, because I can see like, again, like going back to the slow burn, like, you know, I was just reading I remember reading like, let's say The Shining, right? And, you know, I was kind of getting to the point where I was just like, when are we going to get to the point about like, you know, this supernatural stuff? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what's happening? Because like, all I'm getting is like, this man is an alcoholic. Like, I get it.
Speaking of that, oh, I'm sorry, you had
a question? Oh, there.
What advice do you have for aspiring horror writers?
Right.
Right.
Why are you sitting here? Right.
Every day. It's a struggle for me personally in our world today, because again, nobody wants to read what we're living. But write every single day. You just never know when that idea is going to click and suddenly have a novel on your hands.
And every medium is different because we're releasing a Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Mania comic book. So I've been writing comic stories. And you've got 24 pages with however many panels to tell an original story, and that's difficult. Because you have to be very visual and to the point. And each frame has to advance the story. That's really a difficult transition from screenwriting.
That's why I leave it to you.
That brings up a little point here. I seem to be talking a little bit more about film, but how many readers do we have, people that read books? So, wow, here I'm talking about film and you're reading books. My question is, when you talked about advice for authors, with me it's a little different because I get, here's your film, do this. Do you have suggestions? Yes. One person, I'm a member of the Horror Writers Association as well, too. So one of the people that I know there posted a rather discouraging thing about reading. It was in the United States. They did a survey, and they had claimed that 37% of people in the United States don't read anything, more or less horror, anything, newspapers or anything. They said the discouragement is that reading is becoming passé. Even online reading, even ebooks are becoming passé. So if you get independent horror author, big name author, all glutting the market, it's going to be very tough to find an audience. They said that is the cold, hard fact of it. I don't know what the literacy rate or the reading rate is in Canada.
Oh, higher.
But it's higher in Cuba, you know. But that can be very discouraging. The same thing when we talked about streaming channels. There's so much television, there's so many movies. How do you get your movies shown? You just have to persevere, try.
Who's looking forward to going back to movie theaters? Because I know a lot of people during the pandemic have gone and bought bigger TVs, home theaters, and really like the streaming. And I don't know, you know, if this continues on much longer, a lot of people aren't going to the cinema, so you might see, unfortunately, maybe more closures. But
I miss that experience, actually, of being able to go into a theater on the big screen. That whole experience is what's lacking too, I think, right now.
well, I'm surprised somebody hasn't gone and taken a site like we used to have out in the southeast and put up a drive-in. Why wouldn't you have a drive-in? I know the Grey Eagle tried to
Yeah,
put
there was one
in.
in Cochrane too, I think.
Yeah, but they were playing, well, frankly, lousy movies.
Yeah, they did a couple over the summer here in
Yeah.
Calgary.
Yeah, like the Breakfast Club and stuff that you've seen about 1,000 times. So, we're gonna run out of time soon.
I think they hold up a sign.
Best movie of 2021. Was it Saw?
No.
Was it Candyman?
I haven't seen it yet.
Anybody have a strong opinion about something?
The Night House.
Ninth House? Lighthouse.
Night House.
Lighthouse?
The Lighthouse. Yeah, that's a good movie.
That's Hammer.
Night.
That's a Hammer film.
Night House.
Oh, Night House.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They released one yesterday called Malevolence or Malignant. Malignant,
Yeah.
yeah, I've never seen like social media so divided on a film, and it's by James Wan, and some people just absolutely detest it, and then on the other end of the spectrum, people love it, and there's no in between, so.
What about some of the franchises that are going today, you know, the Blumhouse stuff that's coming out, you know, what is it? I don't know, how many pieces are like Insidious, how many chapters is that? And
4.
Too many.
the one, The Nun, I think, there was one
The
called The
Conjuring.
Nun.
Conjuring,
The
Conjuring
Conjuring,
universe.
thanks, see, I only watch this stuff. and
It
I
got
don't know
so
it,
old.
so. Do you think, personally for me, I think Blumhouse is getting a bit of monopoly on some of the stuff that's coming out. Oh, yes.
Well, but I would say I enjoyed a bit of Ari Aster's work, like with Midsummer and Hereditary. I just like that he kind of goes about horror with like in tandem with like the characters going through like an emotional narrative.
Mhm.
So I think that's kind of also an interesting thing because he's talked about a lot about horror being of the times, but like I kind of like this more internal, almost like
Psychological, so,
yeah,
yeah.
horror of it, because it kind of leaves something with you, because people feel like they feel disturbed and
Well, and that's why I write the way I do, because I like to leave that little
linger.
nugget of what the hell in the back of your head. It delights me, honestly, when people tell me that they couldn't sleep after reading what I've written, because it's a thing. I enjoy that. It makes my work worth it, because it's doing what it's supposed to.
Do we think television has taken more control? I mean, television series now seem to be almost supplanting film.
But what?
With what?
But what? What horror series right now?
Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything, you know, what is it? American Horror Story.
That's more campy.
What is
Yeah.
part, series 10 or something, whatever it is? Some of the,
Well, I like Creepshow. I didn't like the first season so much, but the second season was
pretty
great.
good.
Yeah, and the third one's starting.
I'd say
Right
Black
away.
Mirror almost, but that's sci-fi.
Mhm.
there you can do slow burn, you know,
Yeah.
and a lot more effective in terms of a format.
I almost
So-
preferred horror in an anthology kind of
Yeah.
format.
What's the worst film you've seen, or the worst thing that you've come across this year in terms of? Love to hear when somebody gets up and finds, you know, oh, I demand my hour and a half back from watching this piece of junk, you know.
Well, that was Fear Street for me.
Anything by
Fear
Robert
Street.
Oh,
Anybody seen the Fear Street trilogy that was on? Did you like it?
The first one.
I thought it was okay.
The first one was good. The first one was okay. The other two were, eh.
My problem was with the second one, because I grew up in that era, and they got it all wrong. They totally got it wrong. In fact, the screenwriter wasn't born until 6 years after the events take place. So maybe if somebody who actually lived it, it would have been a little bit better. Who's looking forward to Halloween Kills? Yeah, I think that might actually get my butt back into the theater. But they're also releasing it on Peacock simultaneously.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. So for the streaming people, go get Peacock for a day, cancel it. Go ahead.
Do you find like almost like a sarcastic horror or parody horror as like worthwhile in like the genre itself, or is it more of a, would you say it's a separate genre?
Well, I kind of lump it into horror comedy,
Yeah.
but like I watched that Werewolves Within,
Mm-hmm.
and it was trying very hard to be funny, but I wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
It just wasn't funny to me. And with that taken away, the payoff was, yeah, okay, but you know, it was a middle of the road film for me that way.
What about What We Do in the Shadows?
Yeah.
Has anyone seen the film?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was kind of disappointed in the second season,
Yeah, I didn't buy the second season at all.
but I'm
actually.
loving the third season, so.
Satanic Panic. Sorry, I like Satanic Panic.
I like Satanic Panic.
Yeah.
The one on Shudder. So, but comedy again is so hard to write too, and you have to do it well. Remember that piece of junk that you made me watch called Camp 3D? Was it Camp?
Oh, that was that one.
The guy was actually up in Edmonton. The filmmaker was up in Edmonton. I was personally going to go and find him.
It was, I got asked at the Edmonton Dead by Con, which is a good con for horror fans, to introduce this guy in his film and some of the cast. Why me? But they sent me a screener and I watched it, and I had a similar reaction to Terry. My eyes were about as big as plates. We're going, okay. So time comes and I'm like, can you tell us a bit about the film? And the dude was just telling horror stories about the filming and how it took 3 years, and because, and there's some actors who just disappeared because they quit. And so that's why you never see them again in the film. And I'm standing there with my hand like this, laughing while he's talking. It was actually a very bad film.
Camp 3D Part 2 or something.
Yeah.
Whatever it was. But, like, you made me watch it. It's not like Clark Gable, you made me love you, Clark, but it's, honestly, I was going to demand my hour and a half back of my life. It was the one with, you had the Asian fellow, remember, that all of a sudden breaks into the song on the bridge,
Yeah, oh yeah.
in his Jeep or something.
Yeah,
Honestly, movie nights with Jim are fun because he finds the most obscure, odd, funny films that we end up turning the sound off and just making our own script with after a while. I can't remember that one was terrible.
I presume pretty much everybody's seen Plan 9 from Outer Space. Okay, what's the guy's name? The amazing...
Which, Eddie Wood? Steady Eddie Wood?
No, the guy who introduced... Oh, Criswell.
Oh,
the
Criswell.
amazing Criswell.
Criswell, yeah. He's real.
Was it, there's a film, is it Orgy of the Dead? Or?
Yeah, Orgy of the Dead.
Orgy of the Dead. I decided to watch this.
It's great.
And there's Criswell sitting there in his only starring role as kind of Satan. And then these girls come out and they dance topless. And then other girls come out and dance topless. And that's the entire film. And I'm like, okay.
But they were dead.
Yeah, but they were all dead.
But you can get away with that, like in Italy. I'm going to cast my mind back to some of the Jess Franco stuff. And, like, I actually watched a picture called, it's not really, well, you could say it's a horror story. It's called Venus in Furs. And I understood it. It was an hour and 45 minutes, and I went, I understand this. And then I watched the original Suspira, and I went, I understood this too. And I went, oh my goodness, something's wrong with me. This is connecting to me. I know I've sorted it out. So,
I'll share with you some gold here. There's a site on the internet called, it's actually WIPFilms.com. It stands for Women in Prison Films. But don't let that fool you. You can go on there and almost any horror movie you want to find is there. Download, and I always use the slow download because I don't want to buy a membership. And there's one called rarelust.com. Same thing. Horror movies. You can't find it on Whip Films, you'll find it on Rarelust. And it's just amazing. It's the most obscure stuff. If you want transvestite werewolves in a woman's prison, it's there. No, it's not really a film. But now I'm thinking. But yeah, they're there. So I get a lot of movies there, and it's actually a surprising resource, and it's free.
or Fast 32 is one that I use. When you didn't hear that, people are searching privacy and piracy here. You didn't hear what I just said. Yeah, I found there's a guy called Andy Milligan, and we were speaking about some of the background of some of these people. This guy he turned out to be, he was gay. He was had an abusive mother who would basically beat him. He came from alcoholic parents, and he wrote all these deranged films called The Ghastly Ones. And they're very, I guess you could say they're very perverse in terms of relationships, how they reflect relationships with people. And this is one of the few things that I'm actually seeing in the horror film and in some of the comics. The way relationships are portrayed, they are different than they were, say, 5, 6 years ago, even 3 years ago. You're getting a lot of people that are in groups, a lot of people, they're very antagonistic towards each other. And the monster actually sometimes, or the creature or the supernatural event, is actually a welcome relief. I wonder if people have noticed things of this nature in terms of what they've seen.
Not so much in the film.
Because we talked about isolation, but this is how we're going to show relationships. God, I'm long-winded here. Oh, we got a 5-minute? We got a 5-minuter? Okay. Or
Anybody have questions or anything they want to comment on? We've got 5 minutes. Yes.
I don't know if I'm the only one here who thinks this, but I know it's especially prevalent in like zombie movies, and I love them. But the trope of like the humans are worse than the zombies, in my opinion, has been beaten to death. It's kind of brutal at this point, where it's like, oh look, another episode or another movie about how we're just scum and the zombies are like not the worst thing in the world. It's like, can we like go back to anything but this? It's mind-numbing at this point.
Yeah, I have a website. It's called James Sato's Zombie Movie Review Guide. And I have given short spoiler-free reviews for 450 zombie movies. And at the rate they keep coming out, I would probably have another 800 to do, and I give up. Because the zombie movies that are coming out, it's all just, well, I mean, I don't even know how you even make a zombie movie now that's any original or different.
It's called politics, Jim.
But, you know, I mean, it's generally the same story. I can count, I think, 20 zombie films that I think are just wonderful and superior out of watching that 450. Yeah, I mean, there are a dime a dozen now. Everybody makes them.
And the Ouija board films. It should be a whole genre of, you know, bring out the creature, let's haunt the closet.
Terry.
Let's haunt the diaper. You know, I thought that's one of my things.
Did you know Ouija boards aren't actually Ouija boards? It's pronounced Ouija. Oui is French for yes. Ja is German for yes. Ouija.
It's not just a job here; it's an education.
Yeah. Yeah. What is Ouija, Alex?
I think we're supposed to wrap soon.
Yeah.
Well, personally, for me, I can take another question.
Oh,
so,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, do you feel like it adds any additional horror by having like a bit of lore to a story, or like keeping it kind of more of a mystery? Because I know with like demon possession or ghost story type of horror, do you think it adds more of a scare factor by having like lore, or just leaving it as a mystery?
As a filmmaker, I would say if you were setting up your own universe for a series of films, the lore is important. But again, it's up to the screenwriter.
You know, speaking of that too, the big thing that's come out now that I've noticed is folk horror. I had to say that right because people would think I'm saying a bad word here. But it seems like, we're talking like The Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, these type of films. And there's a box set by a company, Severin. Yeah, Severin now with at least 20 obscure films from different countries. And folk horror is it seems with the tradition of witches and wildlife and everything is so more, I can't even speak here, so prevalent in Europe more than here. On sport, we get the First Nations, we have an untapped resource there for First Nations, unless you count the Manitou. But this is another thing. We were talking about creating your own lore.
Like, yeah, well, I like when you mentioned folk, it kind of reminded me of the movie The Ritual. There's kind of like a little bit of a lore to
My
that.
newest book that will be coming out next year deals with urban legends and lore in a serial killer setting. For me, there was a lot of research that took place for even an Evan loss, and it's taken 2 years of work, almost done now, but I researched urban legends and folklore from different countries before I started in on this one.
So,
Are we up?
I think we're up.
2
2
minutes.
minutes,
All right.
or it's a Roman soldier ordering 5 beers. I'll take that. Fire away.
in relation to like folk horror, we see a lot of horror that like comes from the past. Are you seeing any future like horror lately that has elements of like future? Or is any horror bringing stuff from the future, or do you think it's mostly just?
Well, I think for that you're looking at sort of sci-fi horror. You know, something along the lines of Event Horizon. You know, but I haven't seen any lately.
Was it Jason 20 or something? Freddy 20 or
Jason
something?
and the Space.
Is it the one when he's in the spacecraft? So,
Yeah, no, but there. I think actually I'd like to see some more. You know, like sci-fi horror, because it's basically untouched. And it can go. I mean, like Roddenberry thinking about Star Trek. You know, with all the advances that are being made. You know, I mean, there's certainly, you know, a lot you can work with. You know, if you listen to Elon Musk talk about AI right now, and you know what's going to be happening with AI. I mean,
That's kind of
they
scary.
should have that, actually. That'd be a good premise. You know, you have a rich person that blasts himself off into space and they come back and something's changed. You know?
yeah, they're
Here's
apes.
a premise. Yeah. They actually start giving money away.
Okay,
And,
well,
oh,
I
we're
gotta cut her
done.
off.
Thank you very much for
Thanks,
coming in.
everyone.
Thank you for coming out. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Feel free to accost us in the
Yeah,
way
if
if
you have
see
any other
us.
questions, just accost us here.